We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Is that going to
We know how you voted, and America will fire you.
Tired of the old concept of the political left and right?
So I think we're using these terms in a way which has made a national conversation much, much harder to have, and which really marginalizes issues.
Arianna Huffington, the co-founder of Huffington Post, the online home for hundreds of journalists and opinionated celebrities. Born in Greece, she emigrated to America. There, she married former US Congressman Michael Huffington. After their divorce, she embarked on her own political career, running for governor of California in 2003, and then 2 years later, launching the Huffington Post. Last year, she sold it to internet giant America Online for more than $300 million. Her website draws 2% of all internet traffic in the world. Now she's taking on Europe with her brand of journalism. There's already a UK version of her website, and soon there'll be one in France, the Huffington Post. Today, Arianna Huffington talks to Al Jazeera.
Arianna, great to talk to you.
And you too. In
Thanks
Doha, who would have guessed?
In Doha, of all places, absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you on the program, and talk to Al Jazeera is better for it. I've got to ask you, first of all, being here in the Middle East, reflect for me, a year ago, about this time, and the pictures that were coming out of this region, Tunisia, right? Egypt. What were your thoughts as you were watching this region in turmoil, young people demanding a new life and to be rid of dictators?
The first thing that I remember about it is how extraordinary change is. That on one day it seems impossible. The established regimes seem so established, as though nothing will ever topple them.
Solidly entrenched.
Solidly
Yes.
entrenched. And then the next day, the change that has been unleashed can be so dramatic. In fact, I had this thought a couple of days ago when I saw Mubarak being wheeled into the courtroom on a stretcher, and with the dark glasses, and that image of complete sort of vulnerability and weakness after all these years of complete control of a country, and how quickly it happened.
How much credit do you give to social media? Some say it was pivotal, instrumental. Some see it as just a tool that the young people would have found a way to be heard.
I think it definitely makes it much easier. The democratization that social media allows is very important. It accelerates everything. Something that might have taken years can take days. And we see it everywhere. We saw it, I happened to be in London. We were launching the Huffington Post in England when the hacking scandal broke. And it was amazing to see how quickly people started gathering around Twitter, demanding the boycott of advertisers. A few dozen advertisers immediately left, and within a couple of days, the news of the world was no more.
That's right. That's right. So I'm curious your reaction to what we're seeing of late, and that's not a few governments attempting now to put heavy restrictions on the use of the internet. New rules just a couple of days ago in Iran, new rules in Belarus. That's got to be concerning.
Yes, in fact, we saw it even earlier. Remember, after the uprising in Iran, when Iran shut out CNN and conventional news outlets, but that didn't stop all the images from being distributed around the world through Facebook, through Twitter, through simply uploading pictures on people's cell phones.
That's right.
And then, shortly after, there was an uprising in China. And China, sort of having quickly learned its lesson from Iran, you may remember, shut out internet access and invited selective mainstream journalists to the area of the uprising to basically spin them. And I thought this was kind of a really pivotal moment, because it made it clear that it's much easier to spin a few journalists to whom you give access than to actually manipulate thousands upon thousands of citizen journalists who are simply witnessing what is happening or participating.
You are so keenly aware of how interconnected we are in this vast media world. I'm wondering if you are surprised. I certainly am. But are you surprised that a channel like Al Jazeera and the way this channel covers the world, are you surprised that this channel does not have a major distribution deal in the United States right now?
I am surprised, because right now, and 2011 has been pretty pivotal in terms of the recognition that we are so incredibly interconnected, partly because of what happened in Europe and the repercussions that it's had in America and around the world. And it was felt in a very clear economic sense. Partly because of the images that came out of Tunisia and Egypt and the whole Arab Spring phenomenon. And so, to me, what distinguished a lot of Al Jazeera's coverage is something which is obsessive, in the best sense of the word. A lot of mainstream coverage suffers from ADD, attention deficit disorder, like we cover something and then move on to something else. And the thing that I love, and certainly the thing that I love for us to do on the Huffington Post, is to stay on a story and cover it obsessively, which I believe is the only way to break through the static.
Yeah. You think you're going to be able to do that with the Huffington Post?
Yes. I mean, we have certain stories which we consider central to our DNA and which we've been covering for years, like the fate of the middle class. I wrote a book called Third World America, and the theme of it basically was what happened to the American dream, declining mobility. Now, with the Occupy movement and with more and more voices being raised around that, these have become part of the conversation. But if you look at this whole question of downward mobility, income inequalities, they're very recent additions in a consistent way to our national narrative.
What's happened to the basic idea of fairness and equality, and what is happening to that American exceptionalism, the American dream? What is happening to that in the United States right now, in your view?
As an immigrant to the United States, that accent is for real, in case you're wondering. I was actually born in Greece, and I've lived the American dream. And I remember growing up in Greece and walking to school and passing every morning President Truman's statue. And it was a statue that the Greeks had erected in gratitude for the Marshall Plan. And my family and every other family had friends, if not relatives, who had moved to America in search of a better life. These were the terms associated with America. And now you have 100 million people in America who are worse off than their parents were at a similar age. And you have over 20 million Americans who are unemployed or underemployed. And you have kids graduating from college who can't get jobs. So there is something very different happening.
What is it? You're a social commentator. You're involved in this discussion every day. I know. I read and I watch, okay? What's happening? What's happened over the last, maybe let's say the last generation?
Well, what's happened is really a gradual erosion of the American dream. It's become harder and harder to actually play by the rules and do well and expect your children
There's
to
a
do
lot
better.
of picking and choosing
Well,
of
yes,
winners and losers in the United States.
including by government.
Sure.
So I think the ultimate demonstration of that was the bailout of Wall Street, which happened without any strings attached. And I think that has unleashed a lot of the discontent and disillusionment and mistrust of our institutions, whether it's through the Tea Party or the Occupy movement. People may express their discontent differently, but at the heart of it is the sense that we have privatized gains and socialized losses.
The losses, yeah.
And that's very dangerous. And I studied economics at Cambridge, and the founding fathers of capitalism knew that capitalism had to have a moral foundation if it was going to prevail. I'm in favor of the capitalist system, but not the way it's been perverted.
Yeah. People watching this program, looking at you right now, are likely saying, at least some of them, does she really identify with the Occupy movement? She is the top 1%. Do you identify with the people who are at Zuccotti Park? Do you identify with those people?
Yes, because in fact we did a series on the Huffington Post about members of the 1% identifying with the 99%. That has been central to all American social change movements. I mean, take the civil rights movement. Look at the numbers of white people, including very many young white people who risked their lives, who were totally committed to that cause of equality. And it wasn't going to benefit them. It was not a problem for them. And we've seen that throughout American history. You don't have to actually have to benefit from the change you're demanding to be in favor of that change.
I'm wondering, you mentioned opening the Huffington Post in London. That brings us to Europe and brings us to maybe to a question about the Eurozone, your economics background. Any thoughts on the austerity programs that some of these governments are having to sign on to, and the possibility here that we're seeing the erosion of sovereignty, of democracy, where the EU is demanding that these countries sign on the bottom line?
Well, even worse than that is, for me, the sort of fundamental misunderstanding of how we get out of a debt crisis. We cannot get out of a debt crisis without growth. So all these austerity measures have in so many countries, including my home country of Greece, have made things worse because revenues have so dramatically decreased, because growth has decreased, and you see the social unrest, and above all, you see this waste of resources, especially human resources. We had no money when I grew up in Athens, and my mother was determined to give her two daughters a good education. That was our dowry. She said, in Greece they still had dowries. And her point was, you get a good education, that's your dowry. And she would borrow. And that was for me kind of public financing. If you need to do whatever you need to do if you care for someone. So if you care for all the millions of people who are out of work, which has huge social consequences, not just economic consequences, then you do the things that government can do, big infrastructure programs, payroll tax holidays. We have a whole lot of weapons in our arsenal that we have not been using, and not using with the kind of diligence that we should have used.
The U.S. political season, in full swing right now. Your thoughts on President Obama's first term?
President Obama, as you know, ran embodying people's dreams and hopes. And he's now running as the lesser of two evils. And so it's a dramatic change. It's a very, very different election.
You're disappointed.
Well, it's not really about whether I'm disappointed or not. That's neither here nor there. It's the fact that for the first 3 years, he really did not take the economic crisis and the jobs crisis seriously enough. I think he and the White House team underestimated the jobs crisis. They really expected this half-hearted stimulus that they passed to do the job.
Bill Maher asked you the question. You wouldn't answer him directly. I wonder if you'll try in this moment, talk to Al Jazeera. Will you support the president in 2012?
Oh, I mean, I will absolutely vote for him if he's running against any of the current contenders. Again, it's what we said at the beginning, you know, that politics and elections ultimately come down to real life choices. And I don't think there is really any question that he's infinitely preferable to any of his likely opponents.
Are you surprised the extent to which the Republican contenders seem to be pulling the party or being pulled by forces in the party to the right of the political spectrum?
You know what? I actually don't see American politics as a left-right game.
You don't?
No. I'll tell you why. I think that, in fact, when we continue to see it as a left-right game, we are having a much harder time laying out the choices for the American people. For example, caring for the middle class, caring for jobs, wanting to prioritize that. Is that a left-wing position? Shouldn't everybody care about that? You know, when I was in Brazil recently, you could talk to the richest man in Brazil, or you could talk to a labor leader, and there is a national consensus that moving people out of poverty into the middle class is the right decision for political stability, economic prosperity, and everything else you want for your country, whether you're on the so-called left or the so-called right. In the same way, why is it supposed to be right-wing to not recognize global warming as a reality, as opposed to being simply irrational? So I think we're using these terms in a way which has made a national conversation much, much harder to have, and which really marginalizes issues.
Yeah. It's funny though, but you sit on panels discussing politics in the States, and you're almost expected to articulate, you are the person from the left, that representative on those programs, aren't you?
And I always say that our editorial position and my editorial position is beyond left and right. That's how I see it. And I think if more and more of us refuse to simply buy into the stereotype of seeing everything that's happening in America as left versus right, we will have a much more robust conversation and be able to reach policies that will be much more in the public interest.
Can I ask you about what it's like to be you, to be coming off the incredible year you had in 2011, amazing success, the merger with AOL. What is it like to be you right now?
Well, first of all, I wake up every day feeling really grateful for the opportunity that I have to be running the Huffington Post at a time of an incredible expansion for us. You know, we launched 24 new sections this year. We have over 50 sections. We have over 400 journalists at the national level. We are expanding internationally. You know, we launched in Canada.
You are being too aggressive. You are over-expanding. You cannot maintain this pace and the quality and you can't do it.
Look at Al Jazeera.
Well, okay.
What about you? You're expanding. You're being way too aggressive. And I
It's the
believe
truth,
you
isn't
can
it?
maintain the pace.
Yeah.
I think these are extraordinary times we're living through. And this is the time when we need to take the pursuit of truth, the search for truth, which after all is the ultimate journalistic undertaking, right? For me, that's really the most important thing. And so often journalists see themselves as somehow being in the middle and saying on the one hand, you have Senator Inhofe, who thinks global warming is a hoax. On the other hand, you have Al Gore, who is concerned about global warming. Well, for me, that's not real journalism. Because if facts can be ascertained, I think our priority needs to be to present them to the public, not to pretend that they are not ascertainable.
What do you see happening moving forward in the U.S.-Iranian relationship? Where do you think that's going?
Well, there are real dangers in terms of Iran becoming a nuclear power. At the same time, there's an enormous amount of fear-mongering and hawkishness. And if you look at how we got into Iraq and the idea of a preemptive war, there is obviously something very worrying about starting another preemptive war.
Right, right. What are your thoughts on the president recently announced there are going to be some pretty deep Pentagon cuts, a new emphasis on the Asia-Pacific region, cybersecurity, downsizing forces? Do you think that after the cuts are enacted, America will still have a leadership role to play, or will it be diminished in the world?
You know, Tony, I think when we talk about a leadership role, we need to be very clear about where are we leading people? Because our leadership in Iraq, I mean, we need to emphasize how disastrous it has been. In fact, I'm really concerned about the fact that there hasn't been enough accountability, there hasn't been enough soul searching about how we got there and what happened. And in fact, if you look at the president's career, he would not be in the White House had he not opposed as eloquently and as powerfully as he did the war in Iraq. So it's a bit of a paradox that he escalated in Afghanistan and he has not really had a conversation with the nation about what the invasion of Iraq meant.
Take a look at Syria for me. And you have to be as disturbed as anyone at what's going on inside that country and the inability of journalists to get in on the ground and tell that story. I wonder what you think about the future of that really important country in this region. Can a leader survive in 2012 once that leader has turned the weapons of the state against his people?
Well, everybody's hoping that the answer is no. And we're sort of watching how long is it going to take. And we saw this unfold with Gaddafi. In a different way, we saw it unfold with Mubarak. So we've had a good run in 2011. And I think Qatar's role is very interesting. Being able to be a broker.
In so many areas.
In so many areas.
Yemen,
Yeah.
Libya, Syria.
I think it's fascinating to be, you know, a country that's smaller than Wales and have this power. Because the country has chosen to play that role and exercise it. In the same way, being here and coming from the States and seeing the growth and the sense of possibility and the building, not just of infrastructure, but of people and the future, it's really very interesting for me because ultimately, I do believe in infinite possibilities and the ability of human beings to overcome all adversity and face any challenge. And it's really about the will to do so. And I think the will is here.
Arianna, thank you so much.
Thanks
for your time.
Great to be with you.
And thanks for joining us for Talk to Al Jazeera.